Dunaway Assoluta, first published October 12, 1981, reprinted in Taking It All In by Pauline Kael. Faye Dunaway gives a startling, ferocious performance in Mommie Dearest. It's deeper than an impersonation. She turns herself into Joan Crawford, all right, but she's more Faye Dunaway than ever. She digs into herself and gets inside Joan Crawford in a way that only another torn, driven actress could. She may have created a new form of folie à deux. With her icy features, her nervous affectations, her honeyed emotionalism, Dunaway has been a vividly neurotic star. She has always seemed to be racing, breathless and flustered, right on the edge of collapse. In Mommie Dearest, she slows herself down in order to incarnate the bulldozer styles of neurosis of an earlier movie era. Her Joan Crawford is more deliberate and calculating, and much stronger than other Dunaway characters. As Joan the Martinet, a fanatical believer in discipline, cleanliness, order, Dunaway lets loose with a fury that she might not have known was in her. She goes over the top, discovers higher peaks waiting, and shoots over them too. Has any movie queen ever gone this far before? Alone and self-mesmerized, she plays the entire film on emotion. Her performance is extravagant. It's operatic and full of primal anger. She's grabbing the world by the short hairs. Maybe Dunaway had to get into this hard-nosed Crawford drag, the mannish shoulders, the popping eyes and angry mouth, before she could yell this loud. Her back is stiff, her voice is thick with barely suppressed rage, and her diction has become ridiculously cultured. This congealed syrup voice is the only voice Joan has got. She is a very scary, sinewy woman. Wearing a silver lame gown, fitted at the waist, she looks like a high priestess with breastplates. In a scene in the sterile Crawford mansion, Joan is on her hands and knees vigorously scrubbing her own shrine. She's proving her right to be a star the only way she knows, by compulsive, punishing work. She has to scrub the floor because the maids don't get it clean enough. If they did, they wouldn't be maids. The film includes the nocturnal rampages that were the most talked about episodes in the book by her adopted daughter, Christina Crawford, on which the movie is based. In one, Joan, prowling through her children's closets, finds a flaw, an expensive little frock on a wire hanger, and goes out of her head. In another, Joan responds to the news that she's finished at MGM by systematically cutting down her rose garden. She's wearing a sequin-top evening gown as she chops away at a tree. Dunaway brings off these camp horror scenes, howling no wire hangers and weeping while inflecting, "Tina, bring me the axe," with the beyond-the-crypt chest tones of a basso profundo. But she also invests the part with so much power and suffering that these scenes transcend camp. The destruction orgy that follows her discovery of the wire hanger may recall the gothic flamboyance of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And her smeary cold cream gives her the white face of a kabuki demon. Yet she's so wrecked, so piteous, and so driven, that she isn't funny. You can't help laughing at the movie, but you can't laugh at her. When she beats Tina with the offending wire hanger, or whomps her with a can of Old Dutch cleanser, the horror isn't ridiculous, because you feel her tension and madness. You feel the strength of her need to smash this child, who isn't the malleable doll she fantasized when she bought her. Movie stars were pioneer customers in the blonde, blue-eyed baby traffic. Dunaway doesn't hold back. When Joan abuses Christina, you know that the child represents all the disappointments and disorder in Joan's life. Dunaway gets at the mania for precision and order, which often comes with age. It's almost always part of the running battle between parents and children. and sometimes goes as far as weird geometrical obsessions about where things should be. And for an aging star trying to deal with the pressures of the business world, someone who has labored to develop competence and needs order so that she can function, precise arrangements can be the only peace that's attainable. It's too bad that the film doesn't provide any specific allusions to her early life, so that we could visualize the squalor she has climbed out of. There's an aesthetic involved in Joan's rejection of wire hangers. When everything is symmetrical and expensive, she knows where she is. She can feel that she lives in harmony, unthreatened. There's no mess. Order is beauty to her, and the satisfaction she takes in it keeps her going. She's providing her kids with the perfection she yearned for, and they don't appreciate it. So she blows sky high and shows them real disorder, the mess they deserve. Dunaway has only one sequence that's merely camp, and it's an entertaining, low-down number. After the death of Joan's last husband, Alfred Stereo of Pepsi Cola, when she lets the company board of directors know she's not going to be pushed around, she belts out, "Don't fuck with me, fellas. This ain't my first time at the rodeo." She's like a rowdy female impersonator, savoring the jolt she gave the fellas and the audience. It's a release the audience needs. The Joan Crawford of this movie has the insecurities of an aging beauty and the strident aggressiveness of a two-fisted butch lesbian. It's an overheated, horrifying combination. And she's both mother and father to her adopted kids. Actually, she is so authoritarian that she's neither mother nor father. She's a demented androgyny. There is nothing appealingly soft in this boss lady bawling out instructions, so it's flabbergasting to see the rapport that the normally smooth Dunaway feels with this tough, crazy grotesque. It's one star speaking for another, saying that the business devours your sanity and your femininity. The picture sets up Crawford as Lady Macbeth of Hollywood. In a pre-title sequence, she is awakened by an alarm clock. It's 4 a.m. She unstraps her facial mask while getting out of bed, scrubs her face and arms briskly, she could be sandpapering herself, and plunges her face into ice to tighten the skin. There's anger mixed with a sense of duty in the determination of her movements, as, wordlessly, she puts on garments from her perfect closets and walks through the chaste halls and into a waiting limousine, where she studies her script, The Ice Follies of 1939, and autographs photos on a special tray desk. Not a second is wasted. Everything she does is purposeful. She appears to be overzealous, inhuman. But Dunaway takes this star machine Joan Crawford and shows you that she isn't evil or inhuman. She's frighteningly human. Dunaway goes at the role with such magnificent loony empathy that her posture and movements and the way she runs recall Crawford's self-consciousness, and sometimes, when her movements are most like Crawford's, they're also quite crazy. Beyond your horror for the child whom Joan tries to subjugate, you're involved in Joan's need to enforce her perverted idea of discipline. The little girl, played by Mara Hobel, who plays the child Christina, has a prematurely wise face. She's like a pixie dwarf. And in the scene with this creepy, narcissistic child sitting at the mirror pretending to be her creepy, narcissistic mother, only to have her mother pounce on her and, as punishment, hack off her golden curls. The mother and the daughter are both so hysterically upset, and the mother is so unrelenting, cropping more and more of the hair, as if to root it out, that the nightmarish collision of temperaments begins to suggest a great subject, the horrible misunderstandings between all parents and children, their need to correct us, our need to spite them, our raw nerves that they can pinch, theirs that we can press down. Diana Scarwood, who takes over from Mara Hobel when Tina is about 13, holds you by letting you watch Tina's secret thoughts. The adolescent Tina is a fresh-faced yet hidden person. She has to be hidden to survive. She's not docile, she's careful and cagey, but every once in a while she forgets herself and speaks her mind, and she's in real trouble. Scarwood has good low tones in her voice, which suggest the ordeals Tina has been through, and she brings the role a twinkle, a gleam of rude humor that seems to sustain Tina through her mother's most fiendish persecutions. On the occasion when it deserts her, and she raises her voice and talks back to her mother, Joan tries to choke her. Tina is rescued by a writer from Redbook, played in a believable I've-seen-everything way by Jocelyn Brando, who's in the house doing a puff piece on the star's home life. Nobody is really in a position to help the children. Joan wouldn't put up with anybody strong enough to fight her. Her secretary companion, Carol Ann, played by Britannia Alda, who sees Tina's misery, is a wan, pinched acolyte. When she prays for Joan to win the Academy Award for Mildred Pierce, there's a good possibility that she's really saying, "Oh God, save us from what we'll have to go through if they don't give it to her." The best that can be said about the movie itself is that it doesn't seem to get in the way of its star. Mostly it's bare and uninhabited, produced by Frank Yablans and directed by Frank Perry from a script they patched together, which was also worked on at various times by Tracy Hotchner and by Robert Getchell. It takes place in limbo. There's no illusion of any life going on around the action, which is staged right up front. You can practically hear the camera motor crank up for each shot, and when a crowd gathers, it seems to number 11 at the most. The film is a jumbled scrapbook of Crawford's life from her middle years to the end, with continuity that's slightly berserk. After the pre-title morning ritual, which goes on until Joan comes out of the makeup room at the studio and is ready to present herself to be photographed, this is the only sequence that's ingenious in visual terms. The film cuts right back to her home. Right after she wins the Academy Award, the film cuts to her wire hanger fit, as if it were later that night. Does the picture mean to suggest that she's so far gone that nothing can appease her, or is there no relationship between the two sequences? Some of the most promising episodes aren't shaped. The one in which the grown-up Tina, who has become an actress and is appearing in a soap opera, becomes ill and is hospitalized, and the elderly, drunken Joan fills in for her, is just a limp, squishy mess. There's an unexplained, tatty little scene with Tina accepting an award on Joan's behalf, while Joan lies in bed weepy-eyed, watching the ceremony on TV. And Alfred Steele is presented as if he were a butter-and-egg salesman from Topeka, rather than the head of an international corporation. Joan seems to lead him by a nose ring. And did the movie go through a budgetary crisis? Joan forces Al to spend excessive amounts of company money on a huge apartment that is to be their showplace. Then we never get to see the finished thing. There's too much of a beginning to some of Scarwood's scenes. We're almost watching her prepare for them. And Perry violates her performance with shots of the adolescent Tina necking, which feature flashes of her white panties. But he doesn't intrude on Dunaway. He gives her long takes so she can go into her arias, and she sustains them. She becomes so grim and harsh as the actual Joan Crawford was, in her films of the 40s and 50s especially, when her falseness was so regal and heavy that you couldn't cut through it. You didn't feel the presence of anything else underneath. In the obit that George Cukor wrote, he said, "Whatever she did wholeheartedly. Strenuously, rather, she was incapable of lightness, of delicacy. In a scene in which Joan is rehearsing for Mildred Pierce, Dunaway looks like her, but you are aware of an enormous difference. This is Mildred Pierce with a real actress in the part." The emotional violence in this film is potent. You can't get it out of your mind. There are probably people in the audience saying to themselves, "If Joan Crawford had adopted me, I would have known how to handle her." and forgetting how they fought with their own parents. And there are probably others to echo the sentiments of Larry Rivers, who got up after a screening of Mommie Dearest and said, "You know what I just realized? I am Joan Crawford." Somehow, the movie is balanced. You see both sides. There's no question that Joan is guilty of battering her child. But Tina isn't exactly innocent. She has to test Joan in order to get her bearings in the world. The surprise of the movie is that you can watch Joan's killer instinct at work and still not hate her. When the little Tina deliberately interrupts her mother's session with a handsome stud, you know what the session means to Joan, because you've seen her preparing for him, preening herself and anxiously checking out the leg she then casually displays to him. You've seen her jogging, working out. She has constructed herself almost mechanically, a post-industrial Venus. She wants to be perfect, like her spotless mansion. Her assumption of a charitable social role and her generosity to her fans are not just self-serving. She works to provide them with an ideal and feels generous to those who can never accomplish what she has and yet believe in the ideal. Dunaway sees a grandeur in Joan Crawford, and by the size and severity of the torments she acts out, she makes Crawford seem tragic. After Michael Redgrave played the insane ventriloquist in Dead of Night, bits of the character's paranoia kept turning up in his other performances. It could be hair-raising if Faye Dunaway were to have trouble shaking off the Gorgon Joan. Thank you for listening. Please like and comment if you got this far, which I hope some of you will.